Welcome to Evolutionary Biology. Today, we are going to explore the fascinating ways nature shapes life on Earth through natural selection. We will look at how environments mold populations over time, driving the incredible diversity of species we see around us. Let us dive in and discover how evolution actually works. To begin our journey, let us imagine a population of cheetahs trying to catch incredibly fast gazelles. The faster a cheetah runs, the more food it gets, and the more offspring it has. Over time, the entire population shifts toward being much faster. This is directional selection. It happens when nature favors one extreme of a trait over all others. This concept is incredibly important because it explains how species adapt to sudden environmental changes, like the terrifying rise of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Now that we understand how nature pushes traits in one direction, let us look at how we can actually measure this shift mathematically. We use a simple formula to find the selection differential, represented by the letter S. This formula takes the average trait value of the individuals that actually survive and reproduce, called mu selected, and subtracts the average trait value of the original population, called mu population. If S is a large positive number, it proves that nature is strongly favoring a higher trait value, pushing the entire population in that upward direction. Before we move on, let us see this formula in action with a concrete example from the wild. Imagine a population of Darwin's finches with an original average beak depth of 9.0 millimeters. A severe drought hits, and only birds with larger beaks can crack the remaining hard seeds. The surviving birds have an average beak depth of 10.5 millimeters. We are asked to find the selection differential. By subtracting 9.0 from 10.5, we get 1.5. This physically means the drought is pushing the population toward larger beaks by an average of 1.5 millimeters per generation. To truly visualize what this 1.5 millimeter shift looks like for the whole population, let us look at this graph. On the horizontal axis, we have the phenotype, which is the beak size. The vertical axis shows the number of individuals. The dashed bell curve represents our original population. Notice the large black arrow pointing to the right. This represents the selection pressure from the drought, which completely shifts the new solid curve toward the larger extreme. This is the classic signature of directional selection. While directional selection pushes for change, what happens when a population is already perfectly adapted? This brings us to stabilizing selection. Think about human birth weights. If a baby is too small, it is weak. If it is too large, childbirth is dangerous. Nature heavily favors the middle ground. Stabilizing selection punishes the extremes and rewards the average, making the population much more uniform. This acts as an evolutionary anchor in stable environments, explaining why many species remain relatively unchanged over millions of years, a phenomenon known as evolutionary stasis. Since stabilizing selection narrows the trait distribution rather than shifting it, we need a different mathematical tool to measure it. We look at the change in phenotypic variance, represented by delta V. Variance is just a statistical measure of how spread out the traits are. We calculate this by taking the variance of the population after selection and subtracting the variance before selection. Because stabilizing selection removes the extreme outliers, the spread gets smaller. Therefore, the variance after is less than the variance before, which always makes delta V a negative number. Let us apply this variance formula to a real-world balancing act, the number of eggs a robin lays. We are given that the original population has a clutch size variance of 2.5. Robins laying too few eggs have fewer babies, while those laying too many cannot feed them all. After this intense selection pressure, the surviving variance drops to 1.2. We need to calculate the change in variance. By subtracting the initial 2.5 from the final 1.2, we get negative 1.3. This negative value physically proves that nature is squeezing the population toward the optimal average. We just calculated a negative change in variance, and this diagram perfectly illustrates what that means physically. Again, we have the phenotype on the horizontal axis and the number of individuals on the vertical axis. The wide dashed curve is our original population, with a large variance. Look at the arrows pointing inward from both extremes. They show nature eliminating the outliers. The resulting solid curve is much narrower and taller in the middle, perfectly demonstrating how stabilizing keeps a population tuned to a stable environment. We have seen nature push traits to one side and squeeze them to the middle. But what if being average is actually the worst possible thing you can be? This brings us to disruptive selection. Imagine rabbits living on dark rocks and light sand with no medium brown dirt. Dark and light rabbits can hide, but average brown rabbits get eaten immediately. Nature pulls the population apart into two distinct extremes. This is a critical evolutionary process because it is often the very first step toward one species splitting into two entirely new species. To understand exactly why the extremes survive while the average perishes, we use a quadratic fitness function, written as W of Z. Here, W represents the relative fitness of an individual with a specific trait value, Z. The symbol theta represents the intermediate, average trait value that is being actively punished by nature. The letter C is a positive constant for the strength of selection. Because the difference between Z and theta is squared, any deviation away from the average, whether positive or negative, results in a higher overall fitness. Let us put this quadratic function to the test with African seedcracker finches. We are given an intermediate, disadvantageous beak size of exactly 12 millimeters, so theta is 12. The selection strength constant, C, is 0.5. We are asked to calculate the relative fitness of a bird with an average beak of 12 millimeters. We plug 12 in for Z and 12 in for theta. The term inside the parentheses becomes 0. 0 squared is 0, leaving us with a final fitness of exactly 1. This represents the absolute baseline minimum fitness in this environment. Now that we have established the baseline fitness for the average bird, we can mathematically prove the massive advantage of being an extreme outlier. We will calculate the fitness for a bird with a large, extreme beak of 16 millimeters. We plug 16 in for Z, while theta remains 12. 16 minus 12 gives us 4. Squaring 4 gives us 16. Half of 16 is 8. And adding the 1 gives us a final fitness of 9. This mathematically proves that the extreme bird is 9 times more fit than the average bird, driving the population apart. This mathematical proof of a 9-fold fitness advantage leads directly to the most dramatic visual transformation we will see today. On this graph, the dashed line shows our original single-peak population. But notice the large black arrow pointing straight down in the middle? This is nature actively eliminating the average individuals. As a result, the new solid curve splits into two distinct peaks, creating a bimodal distribution. This literally tears the population apart, allowing them to conquer two different ecological niches simultaneously. As we wrap up our exploration of natural selection, let us review the three fundamental ways nature shapes populations. Directional selection pushes a population toward one extreme to adapt to sudden changes. Stabilizing selection punishes extremes to maintain perfection in a stable environment. And disruptive selection favors both extremes, tearing a population apart and driving the creation of new species. You now have a solid mathematical and conceptual understanding of how evolution actively molds life on Earth.